The great amnesia. Before we understand the roar, we have to understand the silence that came before it. In 1918, the world was a graveyard. Between the carnage of World War I and the devastating Spanish flu, an entire generation of young people felt like they had been cheated out of a future. When the 1920s began, it wasn't just an economic recovery. It was a collective rebellion against death. The motto of the youth was no longer save for a rainy day. It was live today. For tomorrow we might be back in the trenches. This psychological trauma birthed an era of hedonism that the world had never seen. People didn't just want to be comfortable, they wanted to be loud. They wanted to drown out the memory of the war with the sound of jazz, the roar of engines, and the clinking of glasses. This was the birth of the live fast, die young mentality, and it fueled the greatest economic bonfire in history. The magic of the monthly payment. If you walked down a street in 1925, you would see something revolutionary. The middle class looking like the upper class. Before this decade, if you wanted a piano or a car, you saved gold coins in a jar until you had the full price. The 1920s killed that discipline. The invention of installment buying, the grandfather of the credit card, changed the human soul. Suddenly, a factory worker could own a vacuum cleaner, a washing machine, and a Ford Model T for just a few dollars a month. This created a hidden impact. The illusion of wealth. For the first time, your social status wasn't defined by what you owned, but by what you could borrow. It felt like magic. It felt like the laws of physics had been suspended. If you could have the lifestyle of a millionaire today and pay for it with future money, why would you ever stop? This fueled a manufacturing boom that seemed unstoppable. Factories were churning out gadgets 24/7 because every American was now a consumer first and a citizen second. The architecture of the night, the Roaring Twenties, didn't just happen in the daylight. They owned the night. This was the decade that electricity truly conquered the city. Neon signs began to glow in New York, Chicago, and London, turning the night into an artificial day. This led to the rise of the speakeasy culture. Because of prohibition, the ban on alcohol, drinking didn't stop, it just went underground and became cool. In these hidden basements, social barriers that had existed for centuries began to crumble. Wealthy socialites rubbed elbows with gangsters. White jazz fans sat in the same clubs as black musicians in Harlem. Traditional housewives transformed into flappers, cutting their hair into bobs and wearing silk that showed their knees. This wasn't just a party. It was a social demolition derby. The old Victorian rules of modesty and restraint were being smashed by the hammer of the jazz age. The hidden impact here was a massive generational gap. The older generation looked on in horror as their children abandoned the church for the dance floor and the farm for the city. The stock market, the national lottery by 1927. The obsession with wealth had reached a fever pitch. It wasn't just professional bankers trading stocks anymore. It was barbers, cooks, and shoeshine boys. The concept of buying on margin was the ultimate drug. In simple terms, you could buy $1,000 worth of stock with only $100 of your own money. The bank lent you the rest. If the stock went up, you made a 1,000% profit. It's a mad like a get-rich-quick scheme that actually worked. The stock market became the national pastime, replacing baseball in the hearts of many. But this created a false sense of security. People began to quit their jobs to trade stocks full-time. They stopped valuing hard work and started valuing the ticker. The psychological impact was a total detachment from reality. People believed the permanent plateau of prosperity had been reached. They thought they were living in a new era where the graph only went up. The radio. The first viral age. We have to talk about the radio. Before the 1920s, if you lived in a small town, your world was only as big as your town. In the 20s, the radio brought the entire world into your living room. Suddenly, everyone in America was listening to the same music, laughing at the same jokes, and most importantly, hearing the same advertisements. This was the birth of mass psychology. Marketing geniuses like Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, began using desire instead of need to sell products. They didn't tell you a car was fast. They told you a car would make you sexy. They didn't sell cigarettes as tobacco. They sold Tima's torches of freedom. The hidden impact? The 1920s created the modern ego. We became a society that looked at neighbors not as friends, but as competitors in a race for the best lifestyle. We were roaring. Yes, but we were also sprinting toward a cliff, blinded by the very neon lights we had just turned on. The neon fever, the hidden fractures, the architecture of the new human, while the history books show us the glitch. The most profound hidden impact of the 1920s was the death of the stoic American and the birth of the consumer before 1920. The social ideal was the producer, the farmer, or blacksmith, who was valued for what he made. But by 1924, a massive psychological shift occurred. Value was now placed on what you consumed. For the first time in history, leisure became a status symbol. If you weren't seen at the new cinema, or if you weren't seen driving the latest Chrysler, you were socially invisible. This created a neon fever, a constant, buzzing anxiety to keep up with the neighbors. The hidden impact here was the invention of lifestyle envy. Before the radio and mass circulation magazines, you only compared yourself to your neighbors. Now, a farmer in rural Kansas was comparing his life to a millionaire in Manhattan. This created a permanent state of dissatisfaction that fueled the economy, but rotted the collective peace of mind. The great urban roar, divorced the 1920s, didn't roar for everyone. While the cities were glowing with electricity, the countryside was starting to bleed. This created a cultural schism that still exists today. The city represented the new. It was secular, diverse, fast-paced, and fueled by credit. It was the land of the flapper and the jazz club. The country represented the old. It was religious, traditional, and struggling. While city dwellers were buying radios on credit, farmers were seeing crop prices collapse. This friction led to a massive hidden impact, the rise of fundamentalism and the culture wars. The 1920s saw the Scopes monkey trial, the battle over evolution in schools, and the rebirth of the KKK, which reached its peak membership in the mid. This wasn't just racism. It was a desperate, violent reaction from people who felt the modern world was leaving them behind. The 1920s created a society that was physically connected by roads, but psychologically divided by a massive wall of resentment. The flapper shadow. The gender revolution. We see the flapper as a fun party girl, but she was actually the frontline soldier in a brutal social war. The hidden impact on women's lives was a double-edged sword. On one hand, women gained the right to vote and entered the workforce in record numbers. They threw away the corset both literally and metaphorically. But on the other hand, the 1920s gave birth to the beauty industrial complex. Marketing geniuses realized that if they could make women feel insecure about their looks, they could sell them an infinite amount of makeup, cigarettes, and clothes. The new woman was free from her father's rules. But she was now a slave to the fashion plate. The 18-inch waist was out, but the boyish figure was in. And for the first time, eating disorders and cosmetic surgery began to bubble under the surface of polite society. The 20s promised liberation, but it delivered a new kind of social prison built of mirrors and magazines. The gangster economy. Shadow governments. You can't talk about the 1920s without talking about prohibition. But the hidden impact wasn't just people drank anyway. The real impact was the institutionalization of crime. Before the 20s, gangs were small-time thugs, but the 1920s turned them into CEOs. Figures like Al Capone didn't just sell beer. They built shadow governments. They bribed mayors, controlled police forces, and ran sophisticated logistics chains. This created a permanent cynicism toward the law. When the government tried to legislate morality by banning alcohol, the public responded by cheering for the outlaws. This hidden impact fundamentally changed how Americans viewed authority. It birthed the noir mindset, the belief that the system is rigged. The cops are dirty, and only the guy with the gun gets the girl. The 1920s taught a generation that breaking the law wasn't just profitable. It was a form of freedom. The credit trap. A house of cards, perhaps. The most dangerous hidden impact was the normalization of debt. In the 19th century, debt was a source of deep shame. If you owed money, you were a failure. The 1920s flipped this script. Banks and corporations realized that the only way to keep the factories running was to make people spend money they didn't have. They rebranded debt as the installment plan. By 1929, over 60% of cars and 80% of radios were bought on credit. This meant that the entire roar of the 20s was powered by a giant loan from the future. People were living high on the hog, but they were one missed paycheck away from total ruin. The neon fever had blinded them to the fact that they didn't actually own their lives. they were just renting them from the bank. The psychological toll. The lost generation. Finally, there was the hidden impact of nihilism. Writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway called themselves the lost generation. They had seen the horrors of the war and realized that the progress of the 1920s was mostly hollow. While the masses were dancing, the intellectuals were warning that the soul of the country was being traded for a shiny new Buick. There was a sense of after us. People felt that the world was moving too fast to control. These led to a live for the moment desperation. When you look at the photos of 1920s dance marathons where people would dance for hundreds of hours until they collapsed, you see the truth. It wasn't just fun. It was a manic episode. The 1920s were a decade-long scream of a society trying to outrun its own shadows. The Great Dilution of 1929. To understand the crash, you have to understand the arrogance of the months leading up to it. In early 1929, the vibe wasn't just good, it was invincible. Economist Irving Fisher declared stock prices had reached a permanently high plateau. People truly believed they had conquered the cycles of history. The hidden impact was the death of skepticism. Asking, "Is this real?" was met with scorn, as everyone seemed to be getting rich. This created a dangerous echo chamber. People invested not just money, but their souls, believing poverty was deleted from human experience. When the crash hit, it didn't just break banks, it broke the very concept of truth. On Black Thursday, October 24th, the ticker tape couldn't keep up. Imagine your net worth tied to a machine that starts lagging. The tape ran hours behind. People sold stocks based on old prices, unaware of further drops. This created the first information blackout. The psychological impact was pure, unadulterated terror. Thousands gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange. They were eerily silent, watching the windows. People watched as the wealthy walked out with gray faces, their silk hats crooked, looking like ghosts. By Black Tuesday, October 20th, the panic had turned into a massacre. 16 million shares were traded in a single day. The system didn't just dip, it The crash on Wall Street was bad, but the bank runs were the hidden impact that destroyed the average family. This is the moment the roar turned into a sob. Imagine you are a father who never bought a single stock. You hear a rumor that the bank is dry. You run to the street and see a line of 500 people. You wait for 6 hours in the cold. Just as you reach the door, the teller flips a sign that says closed. The bank didn't just close for the day, it vanished. Because there was no deposit insurance back then, your life savings, every penny, was simply gone. This created a generational trauma. The hidden impact was a total loss of faith in institutions. People learned a brutal lesson. The system is a lie. There was a unique psychological phenomenon during the crash. The collapse of the ego. In the 1920s, success was a sign of character. Therefore, failure was seen as a moral flaw. Men who had been kings of the world were now seen selling apples on street corners. They didn't just lose their mansions, they lost their identity. This led to a massive spike in fiat suicides. The money died, and the man felt he had no right to exist. One of the most devastating hidden impacts was the margin call. In the 20s, you could buy $100 of stock for $10. But when the price dropped, the broker called for the rest. People scrambled. They sold their cars, their homes, their wives, jewelry, all to save their stocks. But the market kept dropping. The margin call was the vacuum cleaner that sucked the wealth out. The most subtle hidden impact was the death of optimism. The 1920s were obsessed with the future. After the crash, the future became a scary word. Society shifted into survival mode. The colorful, neon-drenched world of 1928 was painted over with a dull, matte gray. The music didn't just stop. The instruments were sold for scrap metal. The crash was the sudden heart attack. The Great Depression that followed was the long, slow wasting disease. The 1930s plunged America into an era of unprecedented hardship. It reshaped lives, families, and the very soul of a nation. Men, once proud providers, found themselves stripped of purpose. The performance of employment became a daily, heartbreaking ritual. Many fathers, feeling like broken equipment, were forced to wander, leaving behind all they knew in search of work. Then came the Dust Bowl, a terrifying 10,000-foot-high wall of black dust. A black blizzard consumed the prairie. Noon turned to night as dust choked the air. Lanterns were lit in homes, a desperate attempt to pierce the unnatural darkness. Inside shacks, dust covered every surface. Children coughed, suffering from dust pneumonia, a cruel consequence of the storms. Hundreds of rusted Model Ts, packed with belongings, crawled down Route 66. The Okie refugees sought a new life in California. A gray generation emerged, children whose innocence was stolen by poverty. Their playgrounds were dirt, their toys mere rags. The trauma bred a hoarding mindset. Every scrap, every piece of foil was meticulously saved, a testament to scarcity. The millionaire hero of the 1920s was replaced by the survivor hero of the 1930s. Resilience became the ultimate virtue. Shanty towns, or Hoovervilles, sprang up under bridges. Makeshift communities, born of desperation, yet filled with human spirit. The loss of privacy became commonplace. Eating in public, sharing meager meals, was a stark reality for many. The breakdown of law and order saw the rise of the social outlaw, a figure both feared and, at times, admired by a desperate populace. The Great Depression left an indelible mark, a security bought through trauma, forever altering the American psyche and landscape. Welcome to a journey through time, where the echoes of the 1920s and 30s still resonate today. These decades weren't just history. They laid the very foundation for our modern economic landscape. The Great Depression forged a new bond between citizens and the state, creating a protective safety net. From extreme risk to guaranteed security, this shift still defines our financial institutions today. The 1920s introduced the installment plan, a precursor to today's pervasive consumer debt. From credit cards to subscriptions, the line between need and want has blurred over decades. Market volatility, a ghost from 1929, continues to haunt our digital financial systems. The fear of bubbles and speculative anxiety drives herd mentality, repeating history's lessons. Generational divides emerge. The hoarder of physical wealth versus the minimalist seeking experiences. Our psychological defenses against debt traps reveal a deep-seated societal anxiety. The urban-rural divide, a cold war of values, mirrors the polarization of a century ago. Globalism versus tradition, AI versus nationalism. The blueprint for today's culture wars. Yet, resilience endures. From 1930s mutual aid to modern crowdfunding, community thrives. Planting seeds of hope. We reflect on our identity when the lights of certainty dim. The pendulum swings, reminding us that history's lessons are not just past, but present.